Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture and its new Storm XT52, the industry's most powerful LED point source light. Brighter than a 6K HMI and powered by Aperture's revolutionary Blair light engine, the Storm XT52 is both a tunable white light and also the brightest ever adjustable color LED. Storm XT52, unrivaled output, only from Aperture. This episode is sponsored by HDR by Barco, where the magic of cinema reaches breathtaking heights with cutting-edge, high-dynamic range, HDR, laser projection. Don't miss the opportunity to immerse yourself in a spectacular world of deep shadows, dazzling highlights, and vibrant colors at select theaters near you. Buy your tickets, learn more, and experience extraordinary today. Visit hdrbybarco.com. Today, we're talking about camera stabilization. We're speaking with someone who created a stabilized head that we used for the majority of the shots in 1917. That head is the Stabileye and recently was awarded a technical Oscar. We're pleased to welcome Dave Freeth. Dave, thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Hi, James. Hi, Roger. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We'd like to start with our normal question, which I think with you will be quite interesting, which is, how did you get to where you are today? Was this something you always wanted to be? I think you started as a watchmaker, and I have to say we've never talked to anyone who started as a watchmaker. No. So tell us your story.
Tell us your story.
It's a complicated tale how I got to where I am. I mean, the watchmaking thing, way back when I was a lot younger, I had a very interrupted apprenticeship. It was back then, I think the country was going through some rough times, and my apprenticeship was actually interrupted 6 times. So I had 6 different jobs throughout my apprenticeship, some more interesting than others. But I guess what would be interesting is that one of the ones I ended up at, a place, it was full of old watchmakers, and it used to be a watchmaking place that was taken over by the Ministry of Defence to do cameras, actually, and flight instruments and lots of other interesting things. But I spent my young years in the company of some really good watchmakers and sort of learnt my art. I mean, my watchmaking was more an interest than a career, because I learned from people at work and tinkered with watches along the years. I've worked on some really nice watches. Don't really have the eyes as much these days, but I still enjoy it. With those watches came, as I said before, the flight instruments, and in the flight instruments there's gyroscopes. So even back then I was learning about gyroscopes. We used to make some gyroscopes for a shoulder-launched disposable rocket system, and I remember seeing this thing, the gyro from it, and it was really small, but it was a full 3-axis spinning mass gyroscope. And around the outside of the spinning mass was lots of little scallops. And I asked one of the guys what they were for, bearing in mind I was a lot younger then. And he told me that some of the exhaust from the missile was vented through some tubes, and it would hit these cutouts and spin up the gyro. And I snuck this up to the end of the workshop and put it on a compressed air line and put the nozzle up to these little idents and pulled the trigger. And this thing just spun so fast, and in my hands for the first time was a spinning gyroscope, a full gimbal locked in position gyroscope.
Will you explain for people what a gyroscope is? Because there may be people that are listening that don't know.
Okay, so I mean, in real simple terms, a gyroscope its main fundamental feature, it relies on something called conservation of angular momentum, which means when a single axis gyroscope, like a child's spinning top, is spun up really fast, if you try to move it, it wants to resist you. So if you put that whole thing in a series of slew rings, or as we would know as a gimbal, when you move that, the actual spinning disc would stay where it is. And way back through our art, for your art as cinematographers, this has been used over and over. The early Westcams, for example, were not so much electronic gyros as we know today, but they were big spinning weights, and that's how they worked.
So you worked for the Ministry of Defense, right? And how did you get that job?
Well, so I was a precision instrument maker when the place I was, Esteval and Sons, the company was called, that used to be full of the watchmakers from Bentheimer Strauss, a lovely company back then. No one wanted watches back then. It was the digital age. The LED watches were coming in and they were cool, and TikTok watches weren't that cool. I think they were giving them away with petrol actually back then. But what kept the company alive was the flight instruments. And with the flight instruments, one of the things they used to make that was interesting was the little 35mm camera systems that used to be in the aircraft wings or in the cockpit through a series of prisms to actually record the data on the flight instruments and gun cameras and that sort of thing. So I got involved in making those. I used to really enjoy that, the precision work. And I guess much later it sort of like all came together. I did a stint, many years at Lucas Aerospace, actually making torpedoes or making parts of torpedoes. Some of the parts were what you would call inertial guidance, so guidance from gyroscopes. And I guess all that perhaps boring years of all the different jobs I did, that the key points were gyroscopes, cameras. That all came together when I joined or met for the very first time Dennis Fraser over at Grip House when I was a little lad. And he took me in to run his electronics department there. It sort of all came together. I learned about this industry that we're in today.
When you were working then at Grip House with Dennis, what kind of equipment were you familiar with at that time, in terms of gyros or remote cameras?
Well, I knew absolutely nothing about the cinematography industry. The first day I went to work at Grip House, I had a suit and tie on, which I must have looked really strange in this industry.
I thought it went down really well, didn't it?
I mean, I used to, looking back then, I was so unaware. I used to run the electronics department there, and I'd get phone calls to say, the power pod's gone down, or what would have been back then, the Hayden system that had broken.
Right.
And I used to put the phone down saying, okay, no problem, I'm on my way. And I used to sort of pack my bag, and go and find a van and just put the radio on and mooch down there. And it was, back in the studio, things are going crazy. Where is this guy? And I just had no idea back then. It wasn't until I, much later started going out on set that I realized, it's pretty high octane stuff here. When you call someone, you sort of need them. But I didn't know any of that
right
back
now.
Then. Yeah.
But what experience then that your experience at the MOD and with jet planes and stuff, how did that segue into? I mean, at that point you went to Grip House. There was the power pod. I mean, I guess there was video assist and stuff already, right?
Yeah.
The Luma crane had been invented by then, hadn't it?
Yes,
And they had basically invented the whole idea of video assist. And so what did you bring to that from the MOD?
I think possibly what happened was, and I feel like a ball that's bounced around the machine at the arcade a little bit. But while I was at Grip House, there was a little sub company there called a really nice guy called Tim Dubois, and he did Flight Logistics Limited. And at Grip House, they had a snorkel lens there, with a fixed lens. I think it was 20mm, and it had a little mirror at the bottom that was cable fed to do the tilt. And I think this snorkel was used on Thomas the Tank Engine. And the guys over at Flight Logistics wanted to put it through the bottom of an aircraft. So with some of my colleagues over there, we put some heaters in it and purged it with gas so it didn't freeze. And we flew it. We poked it through the bottom of a Learjet, and we did a commercial with it for Airbus, at the Airbus A320, I think, or perhaps the 340, but that's getting boring. Of course, then I got to meet the guys at Flight Logistics, and Dennis Fraser had then bought a nose mount for a helicopter, I think from Nick Phillips. And it all sort of came together. None of this stuff was stabilized, and we were flying around the clouds, bumping around. And back then I thought, this would really benefit from being stabilized. And I ended up speaking to Tim Dubois, and he got hold of this really old ex-Ministry of Defense sensor ball, which is a 2-foot diameter round white ball, which had a sensor. And I think this thing used to be a targeting device for a laser-guided bomb. All it had inside it was gyros and this modulated laser that would fire at the target. So from miles away, a helicopter or an aircraft would be shining this laser, and it had to lock on target. So this thing was gyro stabilized. And Tim Dubois asked me, could you put a camera in this? So I took it back to my bedroom at home. We just had our first son, Ben. I think was a baby then. He's a big boy now. He's in the film industry doing Libra like his daddy used to. But I spent every evening on this thing and ran the camera in it. But it was only 2-axis, so it was never going to be a beautiful thing. But it taught me quite a lot. I think from there, I became aware of Nick Phillips and what he was doing with the Libra 1, the Libra 2. Actually, by the time I got to join him, I left Grip House and started my career at Camera Revolution, which used to be called Megamount. And I think, blimey, 19 years I was there. 19 years doing Libra heads and learning my art actually out on set, learning what stabilized image does in cinematography. So I learned an awful lot there.
And can you also explain a little bit for everyone 2-axis versus 3-axis?
Sure, yeah, that's really important because the axes are pitch, which we would call tilt, which is up and down. Yaw is what we would call pan, which is slewing the camera from left to right. They're the two main axes, and that's all you need with a laser, with a targeting device. But when you're in the cinema, of course, the third axis, the magic one, and it is the magic one because it's what makes us feel well when we're at the cinema, is the roll axis. And I say well because the human eye is an incredible machine, and we have gyros. Everything we've ever tried to do through engineering, nature's always done it first. So our eyes are gyro stabilized. I mean, they're gyro stabilized because if you close your eyes and hold your eyelids and move your head, they actually move. You can feel your eyes moving. And if you look in the rearview mirror while you're driving, it's wobbling because the image wobbles because it's going the wrong way. Your brain's not stabilizing it. So the third axis, your eye uses your peripheral vision, and it uses peripheral vision to maintain balance. So if you're at IMAX, for example, and you're looking at the horizon, rising and falling each side of your peripheral vision by a couple of feet, it makes you feel queasy. It makes you feel nasty. So the roll axis is something that you really do need to stabilize.
And can you tell us then what projects you worked on with the Libra head, and what was its main asset, and how did it work basically?
So the Libra head was a dynamic mount. There were no spinning gyros. It used electronic gyros, no moving parts. You move the gyro and a voltage comes out, and you put that voltage back into a motor, which is bolted to the lens, basically. So if everything tilts up, the motor talks everything back down in its simplest term. That's how an electronic stabilizing platform works. And there's one for each axis. But back in the day, I think that sort of head was quite rare. I think the Libra was really the only thing that existed. I used to fly all over Europe doing car commercials, for example, because there was nothing really. There was the really big helicopter systems, but they weren't robust enough to be strapped to the end of a Technocrane on a tracking vehicle. So back in those days, because it was so must have, really, it was new. Everyone wanted it. I was fortunate enough to cut my teeth on all those films back then, all the Bond films, and I went right through all the big films, the Harry Potters, and got to meet all the wonderful characters that we all know and love. Some are still here, some we've lost along the way, but our thoughts are with them always.
And can you also talk about the Westcam system? Because I believe that was quite revolutionary at the time. I mean, it was invented supposedly by the Canadian military in the 50s, but not used on film until the 60s. And a system was used on, I believe, has been used on everything from Tora to Titanic. Apparently, the Westcam system was used on Titanic for the famous bow scene where Leo's on the bow. And then Ron Goodman modified the system in the early 70s, and it became the X-mount. And the final shot of the Antonioni's film, The Passenger, apparently used the X-mount to do a shot that travels from an interior room, goes through the window, and the system, the mount, is transferred from a crane onto a wire, and then it goes outside and the camera pulls back across a parking lot, which I remember seeing when I saw the film. I thought, my God, how did they do that? And it was quite a revolutionary. I wondered if that affected you, because it was one of those, it seemed to relate very much to what we were doing on 1917, that the idea of having a system that you could hand off, that you could do more than one confined sort of space or one rig that was stabilized. Can you talk about that development?
Yeah, I mean that's incredible in itself, because moving a little Stabileye between setups is one thing, but something like that must have been real grip magic to move that thing around in that way.
There's some amazing behind the scenes photographs of it, because it's quite a big old beast. It doesn't have the big bowl that the conventional Westcam has, but it was quite a palaver to do it, and they had the bars of the window had to sort of fade back so the system and the camera could get out through the window and stuff. It's very interesting. But I mean, it's interesting that the kind of what a director and a cinematographer were trying to achieve in the movement of the camera seemed to go in hand with the way technology was evolving.
Which at that point they had bigger cameras, but at this point we're going smaller and smaller, so that technology couldn't work now.
Did you use the Westcam when you were doing, the working with the MOD and planes?
No.
Or was that something different?
No, I never. The Westcam was. I only really knew the Westcam from an old printed book that I had many years ago. Like people collect cigarette cards or whatever, but this book had some of the key things, key camera systems. And I remember seeing Westcam, and it was just a mysterious big white ball. In fact, I don't know if this story is true, but I've been told this story so many times. I want to believe it's true. And you got to picture the scene of and for people that don't know it, the Westcam is a very big white ball with a round glass port, usually seen hanging off the side of a helicopter, I would say. But this, if the story is true, I love it. But it was a really cold, windy, rainy mountaintop in Scotland. And the weather was too bad to film. So the first assistant said, right, we're all going down the mountain for a cup of tea. we're going to sit this one out. And he walked away, and everyone was, oh, great, we're going to get a nice warm cup of tea. But he actually stopped and walked back to the helicopter and tapped on the side of the Westcam and said, "Where are we now for a cup of tea?" Like there was a little guy sitting in it. And I really hope that's true, because that's such a fantastic story.
Oh, yeah, I think it probably is. You would imagine. I kind of, it was very mysterious beast, I mean, how did that work? What was that system based on? How did that differ from like the Libra head in terms of stabilization?
So there's significant difference there. It is about technology, because the old technology, if you open that old Westcam up, inside was just a big column of spinning weights. And it used to be started by a motor, very slowly would start to turn and take a long, long, long time to get up to speed. And once it was whining at this incredibly high speed, the camera was literally bolted to the side of these weights with a little mechanism that allowed it to tilt and pan. Whatever you did with this ball, the camera stayed completely still until you tilted it and panned it around, unless you flew sideways really fast. And then there's something in gyros called where they topple. If you go sideways too fast, the gyro just gets all out of whack, and it just goes mental and will do so until it's slowed down, which could be hours. So there was
Wow.
a few helicopters used to land and just wait for this thing to stop.
Oh, yeah, to slow down.
But the gyros in the modern systems, some of them are so small, like fingernail size, one tiny little board. And in that, there's more than just one axis, one spinning top. There's an axis, a gyro for tilt. There's one for pan. There's one for roll. There's also devices called, well, I'll get into this a bit later, but up, down, forward, backward, left and right, as well as rotational. And this is all on tiny, inexpensive circuit boards nowadays. And that's what the new systems use, because you can't break them. You can't topple those things. They're a lot more reliable, a lot quieter. And they're lightweight. They weigh nothing. So you don't need the appropriate mass. Like if you're stabilizing a really big camera, back in the Westcam days, you'd need an equal amount of spinning mass. So the things were really heavy. But nowadays, the gyroscopes weigh grams. So it's negated in the design of.
Were you ever familiar with the Dyna lens? Did you ever come across that?
I think I've heard of the Dyna lens. That was stabilized, wasn't it?
It was a kind of lens attachment you put on the front of your shooting lens. And it was like basically elements set in, as far as I understand, in a liquid. And it had gyros. And from what I understand, Gordon Willis used it on a lot of street shots in Manhattan. So when he was tracking, it would stabilize the camera. He didn't have to lay conventional tracks.
But it was more about the lens, though? It was like stabilizing the lens, not the camera?
Yes.
That's
a different approach. I thought you might know more about how it might work, but apparently it had a system of tiny gyros that would stabilize the front element.
I think there was something called a Schwemm lens as well back then. But it's two lenses very close together, filled with oil, I think.
Yeah.
And really small magnets actually moving the lenses. And I think they work really well, but I believe, as a cinematographer, I think there's a difference between shooting through that and shooting through your lovely glass that you choose.
Yeah, that's what I would get production say, just get the Dyna lens. Why do you need to lay any track? Because it was like people have read about it or heard about it, and it was like what magic. Production's like. It's the sort of be all and end all, and we're going to save us a lot of money and time. Yeah. But I think I might have tested one once, but I never actually used one in earnest. It didn't really work. But I say Gordon Willis did, so it was kind of interesting what people were trying at those times to stabilize things and shoot different shots. Yeah.
When you were working on the Libra head, were you thinking about, okay, these are the limitations. I'll bet it could be better if I do well, which you did do
Yes.
later, but were you sort of,
Mm.
did it give you a knowledge of things that maybe you should change to make a better stabilizing
Right.
system?
I mean, what could it be used for, and what did you need something else for? Where was the missing piece? I mean, it was kind of interesting because actually on 1917 we used a Libra for a couple of shots, simply because we needed a Libra. The Stabileye, we'll get into it later, but it didn't quite deal with the kind of terrain. But so what were you thinking when you were working with the Libra head at Grip House? And
I think those 19 years with Libra, my art was utterly Libra. I wasn't interested in changing the world. I was interested in perfecting my art. I used to make subtle changes to the tools that I was given. The Libra that I took out, I'd make a few changes, but not to Nick Phillips' design at all, but ways of balancing things better, or losing weight where I could. I think I made a nuisance of myself a lot with the poor focus pullers, saying, "Do you really need that flap? And why do you want that on there? And get that chutney off." And so probably was gave myself a bit of a reputation there. But I learned early on that everything had to be bolted down really hard. The camera had to be at one with the Libra head. But I used to really like it, going out and seeing what I could do with it. I mean, back then, 75mm, if I got that stabilized really well, I used to be, silently punching the air. It was marvelous, really. But these days we've all moved on so far that the level of stability is crazy. What people are achieving now. But what makes something like the Libra and all these stabilized heads exceptional is that if you're a white coat in a lab for the Ministry of Defence, making a really highly evolved, ultra stable imaging platform, you've got everything there and it's never going to change, and you can spend as long as you need to get that tuned and tweaked. But with these systems, all you need to do is change a lens or a flap, or move the position of one of the Hayden motors, and it's dynamically changed. So all your tuning has gone, which is why something like a Libra head, which is a dynamic mount, has been made to work with a constantly changing array of cameras and lenses and payloads. In the amount of times you'd go in the morning and you'd have the tiny prime lens, and it would be absolutely fine. And then someone would wheel in a massive trolley, a 2-man lift, 3-to-1 lens, and say, "Can we put this on, please?" Or the 11-to-1, and you just think, "Oh no, really?" And the Ministry of Defence things would never have coped with that, because they were made to do a payload and nothing more. And I think this is why Nick Phillips was so clever, so applauded for what he did for his art, because he really made it work.
So did you go from Libra to develop the Stabileye? Was that your next step after Libra?
While I was doing Libra, kind of, it was that way. Back in Grip House, I met my business partner, Paul Legall. We found we had exactly the same sense of humor. He's a very big guy. He's very tall, and his personality is exactly the same as how he looks. He's a very funny man. We sort of, over the years, ended up flying model helicopters and model aircraft together, sometimes on set when we weren't caught, sometimes outside, sometimes dangerous.
Just as a hobby.
Just a hobby. But we were out there one day, and the 100-foot technocrane came out on a job, and Paul was saying, you could fly a camera on a drone up there. And we just got talking. You end up in the pub talking about it more, and we took some of our little helicopters, and I started building stuff. Around that time, actually, I lost my father-in-law, who was a really clever engineer. He was known for making model aircraft engines, lots of gold cups for model making. But I inherited his engines. When I say engines, I mean his milling machine, his drills, his grinder, his lathe. So that all ended up in my dusty shed. And I used them to make what would really be the prototype Stabileye all those years ago.
Wow.
I mean, I don't
Wow.
even know how many years ago that was, a long, long time. And Paul and I flew it in my garden with small cameras. And then we used to borrow old broken cameras from our friends over at Panavision. I think we flew a Red, we flew a few cameras. We got it working really well. We were asked to do a job with it. And basically, we chickened out because the thought of this thing with supersonic blades being right near Brad Pitt was not something we wanted to do. So we talked about putting it on wires. So a few pints later, in the same pub, we then got the prototype wire cam system up, and we started flying it around. This is when it was really started to become a Stabileye, because we did a few jobs with it and quickly learned that when you take it off the wire cam and walk back to base, if you leave the gyros on to give the camera a comfortable ride and someone's looking at the monitor, it's like, well, that's our 100-foot tracking shot, guys. So
Wow.
strike the track and let's do it like this. So so we were learning way back then, and Paul and I together decided that we were going to go into business properly and make a few of these things. And it was around then that we were introduced to Henry Braham from his grip back then, very clever grip, Paul Hims.
Mm-hmm.
And had a look at it. We did a show and tell, and he said, I'm going to use it. And he did. For, I think the first thing was something called the Bastard Executioner. And
Yes.
every shot,
Executioner,
every single shot was done on the Stabileye Mark 1.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that was
Great.
And this was, I got to say, this was 2015. So it wasn't that long ago when it was actually first used. Yeah.
It's all of its history really has been in the last few years. It's sort of compressed, and the evolution of it over the last perhaps 2 or 3 years has really stepped up. But 1917, as I said before, quite notably, was a great example of what a small handheld stabilizing system could do with the right choreography, I think would be the word, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Moving it between setups, and because it was one continuous shot, the discipline there, I think, was fantastic. The achievement of everybody working together was really outstanding, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was. Tell me, when you first started developing it, you had all this experience with Libra and obviously aware of other systems. So what was your, I don't know. I don't know how it works. How does it work?
And is it
what
different?
was your concept?
The concept was that because it was going to fly, it had to be small and it had to be light. And back then, really, it didn't have much that you could put on it. But while we were developing it, the cameras started to get smaller. And the two things just hit a sweet spot. And because they were small, you could pick them up and run with it. I mean, we did, what was it called? Now You See Me 2 with Pete Robb. And he was talking to Paul and I. He wanted to do this shot where it was on a quad bike or a motorcycle, actually, sorry. So we said, well, why don't you just sit someone pillion and he can hold the Stabileye and you can stay up here and operate it. And you'll get your shot. And if you want to be lower or higher, or you don't have to do any rigging, you can just ask him to move his arm. So we did that, and we did that shot. And at the end of this long run, because it was a night shoot, I couldn't see what was going on at the end of the run. But Pete said, "What's he doing?" And the guy that was on the back pillion, he actually got off the motorbike all excited and started running after this guy that we were filming. So that was really the first handoff. I think you've got to
Right.
say was Pete Robb, the first guy to
Wow.
use it.
Yeah. But the system, it works, am I right in saying it works through GPS?
GPS was added a little bit later. It has gyros, the solid state gyros, much like all the Libras and all the big heads.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about, I have to backtrack for this one really, going back to the human body. So our balance comes from our inner ear. And I've said before, our peripheral vision is our reference, what keeps our gyros referenced to stop them moving. Now, when you've got an artificial gyro, a man-made gyro, they drift. And if you turn a gyro on with a camera and walk away and come back to your shop 10 minutes later, you'll say, have you moved this? Because either the gyros have drifted, or if you're really lucky to get a system that isn't drifting, if you leave it long enough, the world moves around the camera. So that's another way of looking at things, because actually your set's moved if you've got a really good system. But the way you stop a gyro, an electronic gyro, from drifting is you use gravity. So gravity 1G, if you hold a plumb bob, it sits straight pointing at the ground. So that's 1G, and that's gravity as a vector. So you take that vector and you feed that into your gyro. That's your reference. Look at that and don't drift. That's brilliant all day long. But if you put that in a car and go round in a circle, the plumb bob, if you like, is going to lean over, and the gyroscope thinks, oh, we're drifting. So it actually moves the roll axis to compensate. So you can ask it to forget about that, but then you drop performance off. But what you can also do, you can use GPS. What you do, you ping some of the known GLONASS satellites. You ping off to one and read how long it took to get the ping back, and you do the same with another one. You're literally triangulating it, so you know where it is, and you can have a ground station as well built in. So it's sort of centimeter accuracy. So when you're moving sideways, the GPS tells you you're moving sideways, so you can use that to feed back into the gyro to stop the horizon roll. And if anyone's still awake, there's a little round of applause for you.
Wow. Well, that's brilliant. I mean, I've never understood that till then.
That was really well put.
And the fact it's all happening instantaneously to be able to do the kind of shots. How does the Stabileye different from other systems that are now, quite popular, like the Movi or the Ronin?
I don't really know how to answer that one. I think, well, I like to think that the Stabileye was made as a miniature stabilized head,
Right?
Not as a gimbal. A gimbal to me is something flimsy and light that you would run around with. I think the Stabileye had some really high-end components in it when it was made. That's a complicated one to answer, to be honest with you.
I just wondering technically, how do the systems vary? What are they using?
Well, I
to
think
stabilize the camera.
I think the art is the same, actually. I think the art is the same. I think the Movi, the Ronin, lots of other direct drive, as in no gearboxes. See, this, you sent me reeling down this waffling road now.
No, but it's I
all
think
his fault.
A lot of people don't understand it like me, and I find it really interesting why you go in one direction with a system.
I guess you could say, does it have gyros? Does it have motors? Does it have a frame? Right. Yes, to all systems. Does it have circuit boards and amplifiers and drivers? Yeah, they all have that too. I guess then the difference would perhaps be the software, the actual brain, the personality. I don't know how their systems work, but I know my systems intimately, because they're scrutinized and modified. They actually scrutinize their own environment as well, up to a point. So they make constant changes as they're moving around, and they also try to understand the difference between motion that you don't want and motion that you do.
Yeah. Right.
Whether that's from the operator's hand wheels or whether that's from just holding it and pointing it, which is something I call impulse. I think lots of people call it follow mode, but for me, that's impulse. So there's a big difference in trying to stabilize a movement and trying to make it look like you want it to do something. And I've always tried to make that the most important thing for me is what you're looking at, where you're pointing and where you want that to be. With the human eye, when you look at something, your eyeball it's ballistic insofar as it's like a bullet, right? So it's fired by a neural response from your brain. It tells your eye to move, to go and find its target. The trajectory and the speed are put in at launch. There's no stopping it. Once the eye moves to its target, there's no stopping it. And it moves, or the word is saccades, your eye saccades to its target. While it's doing so, your brain switches off all the information, because you'd be quite unwell if you were to see that. So your brain switches that off, and it's all about the glorious moment when your eyes stop and see the end, what we would call the target frame. And that's what I try to make happen when you move the hand wheels or move the actual handles. It's all about how it gets there and what it does when it gets there. And if you can get that with a really nice, stable horizon, then the brain interprets that as an okay thing to see. And I think there's a lot of subconscious things in cinema that are disposable or throwaway or can make you feel bad. Or the eye is a complicated thing, and I've always wondered how cinematography could use all that stuff. It's been a real passion of mine. For example, all of our peripheral vision is quite low quality. All of our rods and cones are all in the middle. So, if you were looking at a human version of IMAX, all around the edge of what you're not looking at wouldn't be blurred, but it wouldn't be it wouldn't be 8K.
Distinct.
It would, yeah. And I wonder whether even that could be used, because our art as cinematographers is trying to use all the senses, whether it's temperature or fear or all these things, but only through the medium of sight. And that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was really interested when we started practicing with different stabilizing systems. And at first with your Stabileye, I remember being freaked because it is such a human instrument in that it needs to be carried by grips or operators or whoever, and then it has to be operated remotely, which was me using the handles for the pan and tilt. And that was quite different than, say, operating a Libra head, which is usually, we did have one that was carried, but usually it's mounted in place, and that's a given. You have one control that is mounted there, so you're panning and tilting something that has some, and like a dolly will move in a certain direction, but you do rehearsals and you know where it's going to be. But when you have grips carrying the camera on the Stabileye, following action, and then kind of adjusting to the way the actors move or the moment of the shot, it's a very interesting problem to operate it. Whereas the difference being like a Steadicam or even the Trinity, most of the axes are operated by the operator. So it's a different kind of system, right?
Yeah, exactly that. We learned in the early days really that there's an established relationship between an operator and the grip. And through headphones, the operator does all the angular moves and the grip does all the lateral moves. And between the two, you get everything you want. And I tried to, well, Paul and I both really strongly wanted to keep that in the beginning, because that's a formula that really works. So for the grip to run around with the Stabileye while the operator was telling him where to go and framing the shots, it worked really well. It's only in the last couple of years, really, that I think people want to just do it without setting up the handwheels. They want to be in there with it. And some of our new systems are more geared towards that. I've never lost the handwheels because I think it's important that you would do that if you wanted to hand it off. But it's a very different thing running and operating than sitting down, isn't it, on a stool and looking at the big picture and telling somewhere to go. I don't know what the benefits are one over the other, really, but there's certainly different ways of doing it, that's for sure.
And what are the changes in your newer developments?
I ramble, to be honest, James. I get ideas and a car will go past and I'll hear something and I'll change my mind and something else. But I'm led a lot by, I try to keep my finger on the pulse of what's coming up. There's some fantastic new cameras, aren't there, from Arri, the 35 and the new 65 one. And they're too big for the Stabileye that we used together on 1917. So I made another version of Stabileye, which is a little bigger, a bit chunkier, to take those things. But now, of course, it's heavy, so you wouldn't want to be running around with that thing. But, halfway through doing that, there are smaller cameras coming out too, some very small cameras. So I'm also making some really small systems to take these smaller cameras as well. And I just sort of sit and answer the phone, and often whatever I'm working on, my biggest love will just be kicked to the corner of the workshop because someone else has got a different idea. And because we're very small here, and when someone rents us, we give everything, including the workshop and all the time, to make that whatever we do, make it work for them.
And also, there's this trend now towards single takes, shooting adolescents. Each episode was a single take. So surely having smaller cameras are going to be important for that, and also being able to pass things off in order to make it, make the shot.
Yeah, because it's tiring, isn't it? If you've got your poor operator there, even just waiting for makeup and hair is enough to lose the moment. And I've always thought, I'm not talking about other systems that use supports like the Trinity and the Steadicam, but certainly for Stabileye, if it's too heavy that you need some form of mechanical advantage, a system, a vest or something like that, I think it loses the ability then to hand off. So the bigger the camera, really the less you can do with it, I'd say.
Yep. Yeah. And do you, depending on what the production is going to be, because certain productions are going for different types of shot, do you ever modify the software in the Stabileye to work better for what they want to do? Or is it just always the same software?
Pretty much it's the basis of it is the same. The algorithm is essentially the same. Some of the equipment is more geared towards very, very fast moves, and some of the stuff is geared more towards just being more solid. But that's more about the architecture of the head that they take, really. But essentially, it's the software is at a sweet place now that I can use it, for all things really, without much change, thankfully, because it wasn't like that in the early days.
Yeah. What do you see now? Do you see now your system going out on jobs where they're trying to do longer takes? Do you feel there's a whole move towards doing longer and longer takes? Has that, like, since we were talking about the Bastard Executioner and the Darkest Hour, but both those was very specific takes, even if some of them were very long. It wasn't like the whole film's like Adolescence, where it's actually one take and there's no joins. I mean, I'm not going to say how many joins there were in 1917, but there were a lot.
We're not allowed to. Yeah.
It wasn't a film where you're just saying, oh, we'll get the camera and shoot the whole story. It was very calculated how we were going to do it. It was very precise.
It was.
I mean, do you find a trend you're changing?
I find there's a lot now talking about the one shot thing, to the point that I feel it's somewhat contrived now. There's doing something like 1917, which was one shot through an entire set that was made to be one shot, and the story continues, is very different to, why don't we just put the camera over here and do a really long scene in one take, and then pan over there and do that bit over there. There are differences. There has been, and always will be, some incredible one-shot feature films. I think some that I didn't know about years. Wasn't there a very famous Japanese one that people talk about? That's I'll never remember the name of it, but that was one going back. I think that was ropes and pulleys and all that sort of thing. But yeah.
Oh no, there was I Am Cuba. It wasn't the whole film, but it was some of the longest shots you've ever seen in a film called I Am Cuba, which was a Russian film about Cuba, and they used I think they used an Arri 2C, and they did like handheld, and then it was fixed to a wire with magnets, and the camera went out through a window and looked down on a whole procession.
That's
and it
right.
was
Over a balcony,
amazing,
wasn't it? Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, right. And another time the camera goes into a swimming pool,
and
is looking up at all the people swimming, and you think, I'm amazed how they did that.
Yeah.
And that was way before they had any gimbals and whatever,
You know what I get really really fascinated by is the old cowboy films. They were literally back in the day when grips used rope and skill and big cameras, big dollars on track, and they were what they shot with those things was absolutely incredible. I know my art is moving cameras around, but I do feel sometimes it's nice to just stand still, stick it on a set of legs, put it on a dolly. That's really important, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think, because it becomes a point where is the technology pushing the filmmaking, or is the sort of concept of the director and the cinematographer pushing the technology? And kind of like, often you think it's that technology is pushing it,
because we can, we
because
should.
we can, we will, and audiences want something new and fancy. Whereas the way the Stabileye was used in something like Darkest Hour, and hopefully 1917, was a real purpose to it. There was a real reason for having that system and that technique. It's like people were really. I don't remember because I was too young, but when John Huston shot Red Badge of Courage, it was the first time a major Hollywood film did long tracking shots, and it was battle sequences of the Civil War with actor Audie Murphy. And it was like, wow, there was amazing, but he was doing it very deliberately to get a visceral sense of being in a battle and having this kind of chaos in front of the camera. And I do think there's a danger that you just move the camera because isn't it cool,
Yeah. I get asked an awful lot about the whole first person thing. I've even been asked, can we put Stabileye on somebody's head and have them run around with it? Which is, you can do that, but it's only going to look where you left it. It's not going to follow your head. But it's there's a big trend at the moment, I think, for the very fast fighting scenes. Was lucky enough to work on the Roadhouse with Henry Braham. There was some really great scenes at sea on a rib, and I think all the Libra techs out there will know what I mean when you're looking back at what you shot on a boat and you're actually looking at the horizon thinking, okay, I've got away with that one. That's pretty good. But I was watching this thing back, and suddenly the camera actually starts moving around the boat and starts following these people around while they're fighting. at sea on a rib crushing
Wow.
around while the horizon's
Wow.
still, but the boat's also moving in front of the frame. That was I was quite proud to see that. That was a good
Wow.
example of what can be done with good old gyros.
Yeah. Wow. What, do you see anything, any advance in technology that's going to surprise us all? Do you see something coming that, I don't know, where's it going to evolve?
I think there's a lot coming actually in the sensors behind closed doors, actually, between the the front lens and the back of the camera, the actual the architecture there. I think there's some very interesting moves in in the actual sensor, the actual retina part, on the individual, what you would call, well, let's call it a pixel, having AI intelligence in each one of those to work together. So the whole sensor's working together as an array, a neural net. That's going to be very interesting, because it can swap.
Yeah.
Say if it was a matrix C4, if it didn't like what it was doing, it could move that to like E5, and that could pick it up. And if something wasn't being stabilized well enough, the algorithm could move itself around to compensate. And
Wow.
lots is happening. That's pixie magic to me. All that's really clever stuff.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, wow. We've been involved with a camera capture things where you capture the environment and then supposedly make the image or choose your shot afterwards, but that's still got a ways to go. But even just the idea of the sensor being, well, wow.
Well, congratulations on your technical Oscar.
Yeah,
that was really
congratulations.
great.
Yeah,
we were thrilled to hear
very
that.
well deserved.
Yeah.
My God, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. That was quite an honor to get that.
Yeah. Well, good.
All right.
I
Well,
think
thank you for
we've,
talking to us, and really nice to see you, Dave.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you
This
very
has
much.
been great.
Thanks very much for having me.
If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.